Welcome to another episode of Progress, Potential, and Possibilities, discussions with fascinating people designing a better tomorrow for all of us. I'm your host, Ira Pastor.
Welcome, everybody, again to another episode of our show, bringing you not one, but two really awesome guests today involved in creating a better tomorrow for so many people out there. Today, the topic is going to revolve around the Undiagnosed Diseases Network Foundation, which is a patient-led nonprofit. It was founded in 2023, committed to improving access to diagnosis, research, care for all of those with undiagnosed and so-called ultra-rare diseases, with a focus on fostering collaboration between patients, clinicians, and scientists. Two awesome guests. First, we were joined today by Michele Herndon. She is program manager at the UDNF for their patient navigation program, and for the last 2 decades, she served as a pediatric nurse, a leader and manager in an academic hospital setting. She's also a mother to Mitchell, who enrolled in the UDN, and after 5 years of dealing with undiagnosed symptoms, ultimately the network helped lead through genetic sequencing to the discovery of so-called Mitchell syndrome, which sadly took Mitchell's life in 2019. But since then, Michele and her family have started the Mitchell and Friends Foundation to ultimately support families and raise awareness and money for research into this condition. We're also joined today by Dr. F. Sessions Cole, who is board secretary of the UDNF, as well as professor of pediatrics at Washington University School of Medicine. Dr. Cole is a neonatologist. He began studying rare diseases with various genomic methods during his fellowship back in the lab, and then participated in the discovery of a variety of new genetic causes of structural birth defects and of respiratory failure in full-term infants. His research has been continually supported by the NIH as a PI for more than 25 years. He also led the NIH-funded UDN clinical site at Washington University from 2018 to 2021. A lot of very important topics to get into today. Michele Herndon, Dr. Sessions Cole, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show.
Thank you very much for your interest in this topic. We're thrilled to be here.
Thanks for having us.
Great having both of you. Would love to start off as we typically do. I'm going to hand the microphone to both of you to talk a little bit about your background stories here. And Michele, love to start off with you. Take us a little into the story that I mentioned. Talk about Mitchell. Talk about what was happening early on in his diagnosis, and some of the things you experienced in raising a child with an ultra rare condition. If you could please let us know this background story, it's very important.
Thank you, Ira. You did tell me earlier I could talk as long as I want, and I'm not sure you really want me to talk as long as I want.
I do.
It is a long story. I love talking about Mitchell, though. He was a typically developing child. He was my oldest. He was born in 2000. And it's always easy to remember how old he was because, just 2000 plus whatever. So that was always a helpful year to be born. He was typically developing, played sports. He started having just some weird symptoms, I would call it, when he was 12. He was playing basketball that season. My husband was a volunteer coach, and Mitchell actually won the Most Improved Award. And I just started noticing him walking funny. Like that's the way I just described it. Like he's walking funny and just some tripping happening. And I told some friends of mine, and they all kind of, told me I was being anxious mom, and that, oh, I know somebody who, during puberty, they just grow so much and they trip and fall. And that happened to my brother. And, just really, trying to make me feel better. But I just kept thinking that something was wrong. I was a pediatric nurse. I am a pediatric nurse, and I
Yep.
worked in a hospital at the time. But I was never a neurology nurse. I was an
Yeah.
emergency room nurse. And so, extensive neurological things weren't really my area of specialty, but I could tell he was walking funny and he was tripping. So we started with our primary care doctor. He also had some eye symptoms, and we went to the eye doctor. Ultimately, we're referred to a neurologist at St. Louis Children's Hospital in Washington University in St. Louis. And she and I both thought that this was going to be a brain tumor. It just there's a particular area of the brain that affects balance. And I think we both thought we were going to get a head CT, going to show a brain tumor. But to our surprise, it didn't. The brain was normal. And ultimately did an MRI, which showed inflammation on his spinal cord. And I've learned a lot through this journey. As a nurse, I think I was maybe lulled into this belief that we could solve almost anything in medicine, right? Like the words "I don't know" never came to me that a physician would tell me I don't know. I just thought that this modern era of medicine, we could solve everything. We could take a tumor out, we could do a surgery, we could give you a medicine. And so when they kept saying, "We don't know, I don't know," that was really a new thing for me. They were sending any lab known. I mean, we were at a top-notch hospital and medical school. They were sending all kinds of labs testing, and they were all coming back negative. And you would think, oh, whew, it's negative. And yes, we were happy, right, that he
Right.
didn't have some of these known diseases. But on the other hand, it's also disappointing that we're not getting answers. So that was when he was 12. He had an up and down course for the next few years. He would go to therapy, he would be in a wheelchair, he would regain strength and start walking again. But it was this up and down, and every time he would plateau again, it would be a little bit lower than he was the time before. So it was neurodegenerative. And like you mentioned, after about 5 years, we decided to enroll him in the Undiagnosed Diseases Network.
Mm-hmm.
A physician who had cared for him previously was working at Baylor College of Medicine, which was a site at the time of the
Yep.
Undiagnosed Diseases Network.
Mm-hmm.
Washington University in St. Louis is now a site, but at the time they weren't. So this was before they became a site. So we went to Baylor, met with lots of specialists, and they ended up doing whole genome sequencing on him. He had had exome sequencing, which is where a small part of your genetics is looked at,
Right.
but the UDN did whole genome sequencing on him and my husband and I, and ultimately found a mutation, a variant that the scientists felt was worth looking into. And they ended up taking the genetic mutation in my son and putting it into a fruit fly,
Right.
which this again was totally new to me. I had never heard of fruit flies having, whatever percentage of the same genome as us. I mean, it was totally new. And so they developed these Mitchell fruit flies, the lab down in Houston, Dr. Hugo Bellin and Dr. Chung. I remember the call that I got from the physician contact down there when they told us that the fruit flies couldn't fly. And that was their first, like, we think we've got it.
Right.
And then they were able to link it through something called Gene Matcher to one other patient all the way across the world in South Korea.
Mm.
And that was really the light bulb. Okay, this is it. So yeah, that was in 2018 is when they really were like, we know that this is the mutation that caused it.
It's again amazing. And as you were saying, we are, I guess, all having been in this industry for, I myself lulled into thinking that, yeah, we understand most, but, again, that's a perfect example. And I appreciate you sharing the story on what people with these ultra rare conditions and their families have to go through. So, no, I appreciate so much, Michelle, giving that background. Dr. Cole, I'd like to sort of, again, a similar story here in the sense that I went through your quite extensive publication record, and I learned a lot of new terms. I mean, diseases that you have published on over the years, including Wolff-Parkinson-White syndrome, lethal congenital contracture syndrome, something Weidmann-Raustenstrauss syndrome. I mean, progeria. So you really immersed yourself in all things ultra rare. You know, I think a lot of what you're involved in, even today, got started though with something known as surfactant protein B deficiency, another very uncommon autosomal recessive lung disorder. Talk about a little your background as well, if you would, and how sort of this. It's not a basket. It's not a small basket by any means, because we'll be talking about that. There's about 10,000 or so of these conditions nowadays, but what got you initially looking at such an ultra rare condition as this unique lung disorder?
Well, I was, I guess, lucky that I took care of one baby in 1991. And this was a baby who was born after the full 9 months. His mother did everything right. He had two older siblings who were both normal. And when he came out, he emerged into the world ready to go. But within several hours of birth, he developed progressive failure in his ability to breathe. This required initiation of life support at the outside hospital and then transfer to us, where we were unable to sort of maintain his lung function with what I would call routine life support measures. And so he was put on a heart-lung machine for 10 days. And I remember very vividly talking to mom and dad and saying, he's a boy. Boys are always a little, different than girls. Sometimes their lungs are a little less ready to come into the outside world when they're born. And so we're just giving them a few days to a week to 10 days to sort of recover. And despite his run on the heart-lung machine, his lung function didn't improve. And so we eventually took a small piece of his lung and looked at it under a microscope, and we found a very unusual appearance to his lung. And it turns out we then asked mom and dad, were there any other problems with having children? And he had a sister 20 years earlier who had been born after the full 9 months, developed breathing problems shortly after birth, and died at 6 weeks of age. And we were able to find that baby's autopsy and compare, looking under the microscope at the sister's autopsy and our patient's autopsy, and each had a very, very unusual appearance. And so we speculated that this might be an inherited problem. And then we were just completely lucky. I would not want to say we were smart, we were just lucky, in that we had certain chemicals and reagents that we could use to try to look at specific genes for, actually, there are about 10,000 genes expressed in the lung. We happen to have chemicals that we were able to use to look at 4 of these, and lo and behold, one of them was abnormal, and that was the surfactant protein B gene. Mm-hmm. And that was the first cause of inherited lung failure in full-term babies that was ever identified. And we eventually went on several years later to try lung transplantation for these children, because we didn't have any other way of correcting the genetic defect at that time. And we now have, since 1994, the largest experience with transplanting lungs into babies with these inherited problems that cause lung failure in the newborn period. So we're now actually working on a variety of different new methods that would avoid lung transplantation to try to help rescue these babies with inherited problems. So that was sort of my introduction. And then I was fortunate to be able to leverage the resources here at Washington University in St. Louis. Washington University was part of the Human Genome Project. Yep. That was the project in the late 90s and early 2000s to sequence all of the gene code in a single individual. Washington University, there are 3 billion bits of gene code that we all carry that are our inheritance. And Washington University provided the gene code results for 1 billion of the 3 billion gene code pieces for the Human Genome Project. So there was a lot of expertise and technology available here, and I've been basically applying that expertise and technology to baby problems, and now more recently, problems of undiagnosed patients through the Undiagnosed Diseases Network.
Excellent. So yeah, so here we're talking about close to 10,000 known rare diseases. So we're talking about 30 million people in the United States alone, undiagnosed, ultra rare patients. As you were just mentioning, Dr. Cole, the NIH, this Human Genome Project is done. In 2008, National Human Genome Research Institute establishes the Undiagnosed Diseases Program as a method ultimately to increase the communication, obviously not just between physicians but patients, their families, to make this a little more of a productive and efficient process. I'd love to just sort of talk with both of you, and again, we'll start with Michele. And I know, Michele, you're a pediatric. I mean, you worked in pediatric trauma and injury prevention, so obviously you knew the healthcare system. But again, talk a little bit about sort of the evolution, from the perspective of the patient side, taking your pediatric nursing hat off for a moment, but just a little bit of how you've seen sort of the evolution of that part of the equation. And we'll go back to Dr. Cole after this, and we'll talk about gene sequencing and iPS cells and all that stuff. But give us a little, of your feedback on that and how you've seen the evolution of the space, specifically around the family and what's been going on since 2008.
Sure. So, when Mitchell first started having symptoms, it was 2012, 2013. And there have been a lot of changes in genetic testing just in that 10-year period.
Right.
And I remember when he first had his exome done and, some variants of unknown significance came back. And I remember multiple specialists telling us, it's probably genetic. We just don't know what it is yet. It's something that hasn't been reported yet. The doctors at Washington University sent us for multiple consultations at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, University of Alabama. So they were, using all the resources out there, and they were telling us this is probably genetic. We just don't have a test for it yet. And so then, looking 7 years later, when they did his whole genome, they had the right people in the room to say that variant, which was on his exome 5 or 6 years previous, actually might be something. And so it was just in that 5 years, like the knowledge base had grown so much, the UDN and the idea of, shared science and communication made it so that this diagnosis was possible, whereas 5 years previously, it was there. It was in the data, but they weren't able to see it. So that was just like stunning to me that, there's all these genetic answers out there that just we don't know the answer yet. And with how quickly, genetic testing and research is moving forward, we're going to be finding answers a lot quicker and for a lot more patients. From a family perspective, this is going to kind of change gears a little bit, but it still speaks to something that we're hoping the patient navigation program and the UDNF will be able to help with. We were kind of in that early stage of, diagnosis with the UDN, and it was amazing. We had this diagnosis, we had a publication of 3 patients, but then it was kind of like, now what do we do?
Right.
And right at that time, Mitchell was not doing well. Some physicians at WashU were working with us to try and get a potential drug that we thought might help. So we were trying to get approval from the FDA. That did not arrive in time for Mitchell. But then, after kind of our grieving period, COVID, we started meeting more and more patients. So patients were getting diagnosed with Mitchell syndrome because it was now published,
Yep.
because of the work that the UDN did. And the researchers would, with their permission, connect the families to my husband and I. And at first we thought, oh, great, we're going to be able to give them support. We're going to be able to, let them have a friend who understands, something that we didn't have.
Yep.
And that was great. But really quickly we realized they need more than support. They need a treatment that works. Yep. And so my husband and I, through our foundation that you mentioned, working to fund research, but that's something that the UDN and the UDNF are working towards is, a therapeutic matching program, which is something that Dr. Cole can speak more to. But, it really looks at, now we've diagnosed you, what happens after that, especially with these ultra rare diseases?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'll a little later on, we'll talk about topics like repurposing, and which has become kind of hot in the area of the ultra rare. But Dr. Cole, similar type question. Again, you've been, I've been looking at your papers. You've been publishing on studies using pooled genomic DNA because of the rare nature of these cases. The advent of patient-specific induced pluripotent stem cells as new ways to model these diseases. A very interesting paper you wrote in October 2021 in Genetics and Medicine. It was entitled "One is the Loneliest Number: Genotypic Matchmaking Using the Electronic Health Record." Similar question. Take us a little, because you've been there all along. As some of these tools didn't exist back in the late 90s. Now they're here. Talk a little bit about that as well, if you would.
Yeah, there's been really a dramatic expansion in our capacity to both analyze the genome and predict which of the gene code differences are going to be causing specific diseases. And again, when there are 3 billion pieces of gene code, you can imagine that from an analysis perspective, this is quite a heavy burden to try to take on. However, thanks to rapidly advancing computational methods, and now with the introduction of artificial intelligence-based methods and natural language processing-based methods and machine learning-based methods, we anticipate being able to accelerate significantly our ability both to identify individuals who have undiagnosed diseases who may be candidates for further genetic analysis, and then getting those individuals together in a way with subspecialists and with individuals who can help analyze the problems. One of the true secret sauce of the Undiagnosed Diseases Network is that it brings together individuals both who are experts clinically, who are experts from the point of view of technology, who are experts from the point of view of using computers to analyze data, and investigators who know how to model the specific variants of the specific gene code problems in these sort of systems like the fruit fly that Michele described. So we are now moving dramatically forward on the Diseases Network's mission, which is to solve medical mysteries through team science. And we're hoping that that is going to include very soon solving therapeutic mysteries through team science, as we can use for example, the model organism, the fruit fly, to try to test in a very high throughput fashion various strategies to try to rescue the problem that is caused by the gene code difference. And that those strategies run from drugs that are already approved by the Food and Drug Administration for other diseases, but may work because they exert an influence on the pathway that's disrupted by the gene code problem. New strategies for changing the gene code itself, called genome editing. New strategies for gene replacement therapy. New strategies for altering how the gene works by using something called antisense oligonucleotides. So all of these are coming rapidly down the pike, and we are really poised for an explosion of both diagnostic and therapeutic capacity here for the undiagnosed disease and ultra-rare disease population.
Excellent. Excellent. And one more thing before we get into the patient navigation program, and again, you can tag team on this one as you wish. I just want to put that because the Undiagnosed Disease Network is it started off, maybe it was smaller, but it's not small anymore. It's made up of, there's a coordinating data center. I think something like 14 different clinical sites. One is actually just a couple blocks down the street here at Children's Hospital Philadelphia. Baylor, Duke, Harvard. So I just want to get the message out there as well that even though these are rare diseases, a lot of the premier academic medical centers in our country are looking at rare diseases. Can you both talk about that?
Yeah, well, I think for sure, because rare diseases are important for understanding biology, not only of the rare disease, but also of more common diseases. Basically, each rare disease patient is a human experiment.
Yep.
And these rare disease, these Undiagnosed Diseases Network sites have really put together the expertise and the infrastructure to try to leverage these human experiments, not only to benefit the patient, which is the first priority, but also to understand how we can benefit patients with many different but similar mechanism-based diseases. And so this is a very important opportunities that, again, we are going to be able to leverage even more as we go forward over the next 4 or 5 years.
Excellent.
Yeah, we have a perfect example of that with Mitchell syndrome, and that the researcher who led the fruit fly research, through the research to look at ACOX-1 and the pathway and the fruit flies for that, is able to translate it to some work in a possible drug that could be used for multiple sclerosis. And so, that work led to more discovery. And so, it's not just, the 30 patients we know right now with Mitchell syndrome who are benefiting from the time, money, energy spent on this study. There's potentially, so many more that will benefit.
Outstanding. Okay, let's talk about the UDNF, the Undiagnosed Diseases Network Foundation, founded in 2023. Again, as mentioned, committed to improving access, diagnosis, research, and care. And you have sort of these three primary aspects of the program: fostering community between patients, families, clinicians, social services for support, and what we'll get into a little bit, research and diagnostics programs. Again, you can tag team on this one as you want to give us a little bit about what's been going on, what happened in 2023, and a little bit of the evolution of this program, and love to hear all about it.
Sure. Well, I can start just really talking about my own personal passion for why I felt we needed a patient navigation program.
Absolutely.
When I was going through everything with Mitchell, I was so privileged to have amazing support. Family, church family. I worked at a top medical institution, amazing doctors, but I still felt alone. Like I didn't know what I was doing, and I didn't know what was coming next. And I didn't have help with like simple things like he was getting weaker and I couldn't get him out of the bathtub, right? And some of that was probably, maybe they assumed that, oh, mom's a nurse, she knows how to do things like medical equipment. Well, this mom didn't know anything about that. And so I saw other populations who had, these care coordinators or, some type of navigator to help them. And I just kept thinking, I wish I had that. And a lot of times the navigators sometimes are only for helping to coordinate appointments. But if you look in more of like the hematology oncology space, that's where navigation was born in the 1980s. Sure. It really is coming alongside the patient to help with a variety of things, from prevention to follow-up to support. And I wanted that for our ultra rare and undiagnosed population. So that really was my passion behind wanting to come on board. And when we knew that the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative agreed with our need for navigation for this population, it was just so exciting. And I was happy to come on board last September to get this program up and running.
And I think it's important to understand also, Ira, that even though each of these rare diseases has different symptoms and different time courses and may have different therapies, there are certain feelings that these families and patients experience that are quite thematically similar.
Okay.
As Michele indicated, it's easy to feel alone when you don't have a diagnosis. It's easy to feel confused when you don't have a diagnosis. And so, the diagnostic odyssey is really sort of hopefully trying, and the patient navigation navigator program of the UDNF is really aimed at understanding and supporting these families with these very similar needs so that they can hope. Because hope is really the sort of vitamin that keeps these families going. And it's easy to lose hope when there are so many different details and problems and issues that no one has ever heard of before, that no one seems to be able to do anything about, and that sort of leaves you alone. And so the Patient Navigator program is really aimed at supporting and helping families and patients who are undiagnosed go from undiagnosed to diagnosed. And I think this is a very important program, as Michele has indicated, for all of the families and all of the patients who are on these prolonged diagnostic odysseys. And I would remind everybody that the average diagnostic odyssey in the United States is between 7 and 10 years. It's not 10 days or even 10 months. So having this kind of a program in place really helps keep patients supported. And we hope it will also contribute to shortening the diagnostic odyssey for undiagnosed patients.
Clearly, what we're doing right now in recording this episode is getting the information out there and spreading the word. Obviously, community outreach and education for something like this, which, again, it's rare, but it's not, because we talked about that 30 million number in the U.S. alone. What else do you have going on per the UDNF in terms of getting this message? Podcasting is great, a great way, but what else is happening in terms of getting out there on the street and getting out in the communities to let them know there is this amazing organization that will not just allow you to find resources, but really handhold into an area that most people that learn about this are probably extremely unfamiliar with.
I think we have a lot of strategies that we're looking forward to implementing, in particular with community outreach, outreach to providers who may not be aware of the Undiagnosed Diseases Network and that they can refer their patients there. In particular, there are underserved communities where the providers have no idea about the UDN. So really wanting to reach out to make sure that there's more awareness of the Undiagnosed Disease Network program, and also the partnership with the UDNF and the patient navigation program. It's important to point out, I want to make sure everyone is aware, the patient navigators are not only for patients who are in the UDN or patients who are applying to the UDN. For various reasons, sometimes someone applies to the UDN and it's determined that it's not a case that the UDN thinks that they should take on or can help with. And so we will continue to support those patients, even if they're not a participant in the Undiagnosed Diseases Network. We will continue to link them to resources. We will try and find other scientists or projects, things that will work for that patient. So, if you're not in the UDN, we will still continue to support you. Or if you've gone through the UDN and they don't have any answers for you, again, we'll continue to support you however we can. So it's really, and it's evolving how we're going to be helping these patients, but It's not just for patients of the UDN.
And I think also it's important to emphasize that the UDNF is very intentional in its desire to increase trust with those undiagnosed patients who have experienced structural racism or have experienced other negative problems in interacting with the healthcare delivery system.
Right.
For example, there are many individuals who would say, I don't want my gene code tested because I'm afraid of what somebody might do with it.
Sure.
And we're trying to get over those concerns by working directly with communities who have been historically underrepresented in genetic research.
Right.
We can generate trust between us and them, because I do feel that if they are left out of the ability to take advantage of these kinds of rapidly evolving genetic technologies, that their outcomes will be hurt by their not being included.
While we're on that topic, I think it's a great segue, because I think quite too often people hear ultra rare disease. This is something that eh, the pharma companies are never going to touch, and as a result, there's always going to be a major drought in terms of the therapeutic options. But as you've both shown, we're at a very unique time in 2024. And Dr. Cole, I want you to talk more about the CRISPRs and the gene editing and RNA interference and everything on the high tech front. Michele, you mentioned again, looking at existing drug possibilities, and this is the whole repurposing theme has been quite interesting for us on the show, not just in sort of larger chronic diseases, but in some of these ultra rare conditions. And one of the cases that we profiled last year is actually a doctor right down the street here at Penn, is Dr. David Fagenbaum, who had Castleman's disease, figured out that he could cure or help himself with the immunosuppressant rapamycin, and that's a really interesting success story there. Talk a little bit about some of what you envision in terms of the terminology on the site is therapeutic matching and these unique sort of technological opportunities that exist today, and then with Dr. Cole we'll get into sort of the future.
Yeah. I'll let Dr. Cole really explain therapeutic matching, and I would say that for myself, I've been through the process, and we have one other navigator who's also an RN, and the two of us will be the navigators who will be coming alongside the patients and families who are moving forward in the therapeutic matching. But I just quickly wanted to kind of talk a little bit there. So the drug that we were trying to get for Mitchell is not FDA approved, and that was where the struggle was.
Gotcha.
It was in clinical trials, and the drug company wanted to work with us, but again, there were just barriers and a lot to try and get through. But something that's interesting is since Mitchell's passed, we've grown our community to, we know over 30 patients throughout the world. And as we talk, and we're currently working on a natural history study, and parents are communicating, we heard from one or two parents that their doctors had told them to try riboflavin. They thought that the patient had a riboflavin deficiency. And when they gave the patient riboflavin, they did better. When they stopped, they did worse. And so riboflavin is relatively, benign as far as, harmful effects of giving, riboflavin. And so more and more of the providers are prescribing riboflavin to the patients, and we're seeing benefit. So now we can take something as simple as riboflavin and put it to the fruit flies, and we can do the studies with the flies to see, is there truly benefit from something like riboflavin? So just bringing families and patients together to share their experience, we find something that maybe no one would have thought about before. So that's not drug repurposing, but again, it's a potential therapeutic that a lot of our patients are trying now, because of the low risk of riboflavin.
Right. Yeah, and the whole era now of whatever with expanded access or right to try or a lot of these new modalities probably make it easier to get in touch with the pharma companies and say, hey, can we get into some of these programs? So no, that's refreshing and quite interesting to hear. Dr. Cole, take us to 2024 and beyond. What gets you the most excited? Obviously we talked about iPS cells and be able to model these diseases better, higher accuracy. You mentioned some of the cutting edge stuff in the CRISPR world and gene editing. Where do you see sort of the future of therapeutic development in the ultra rare space?
So I think the key issue that the Undiagnosed Diseases Network has taught the ultra rare community, both investigators and clinicians, is that the first step towards therapy is understanding the mechanism that causes the problem. So when these gene code differences occur, the gene code differences can disrupt how the body works in dozens of ways. And some of those ways may be treatable with already available Food and Drug Administration approved drugs.
Hmm.
And some of them may be treatable with other strategies. One of the sort of, I think, things that is going to happen over the course of the next 5 years is that we are going to move towards therapies where we can treat a patient with a genetic problem once and it's done and the patient is rescued. And so that's called gene replacement therapy, or another strategy is called genome editing. In either situation, the gene code problem is corrected once, and then the gene that's corrected functions normally thereafter. One of the issues here is, of course, these individuals who have these gene code problems may have experienced some damage associated with the gene code problem that may or may not be reversible. And we're currently trying to figure out how to assess reversibility of the sort of disruption caused by the gene code difference. But certainly the sort of what I call one and done therapy for ultra rare patients, I think is going to be a reality here in the next 5, 6, 7, 8 years. The other therapies that we're currently sort of exploring that are more or less available in the next now and going forward over the next 2 or 3 years will be repurposing Food and Drug Administration approved drugs and antisense oligonucleotides. So
Sure.
these are little bits of matching sort of bits of chemicals that match the gene code problem, that are designed to match the gene code problem and to correct the gene code problem. So these have already been used for a number of rare diseases. The first one was a disease called spinal muscular atrophy.
Yep.
And that has been extremely successful in terms of reversing what was previously a lethal disease in infancy and childhood. And now these children are surviving. So I think, that's a tremendous step forward. Antisense oligonucleotides have a lot of promise for a number of different diseases. However, they can't be used for every disease.
Right.
Because of how they work. And so we are going to need to have sort of a toolbox of therapies from which we can choose the one that is best suited for the mechanism that's disrupted by the gene code problem. And I think that is happening now, and I think it's going to happen more and more over the course of the next 5 to 10 years. Yes, there are issues with cost. I think, the recent sort of sickle cell therapy cost has been widely publicized. These gene replacement therapy and genome editing strategies do cost a lot of money. I am optimistic that we will find ways of reducing the cost of those therapies to be sure that they can be accessed by anyone who has the gene code problem.
It's an exciting future for these patients, I believe, as you bring these technologies into play, especially, seeing sort of the birth of gene therapy down the street here. It was a little bit of a roller coaster ride in the 90s, but with the first CRISPR trials and everything, as you were just mentioning, happening, I think it's an extremely exciting time for the entire undiagnosed disease world. As we get close to wrap up, any final messages that both of you have in terms of upcoming events that are happening per UDNF? Anything that I missed while I have both of you, please take the floor as we wrap up.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure people are aware that they can contact us at info@udnf.org if they are interested in the patient navigator program. They just email info@udnf.org and can say, I'm interested in a patient navigator, and we'll get back to them, within 1 to 2 business days. They also can go to our website, udnf.org, and there's a spot under, it says get involved, and then it says webinar recordings. We've done a few webinars for the community, and they can go to our website, and there's an entire webinar about the patient navigation program and another one about the UDNF kind of more broadly. So those are available for patients and families and providers to review on our UDNF website.
And we will put links to that in the bio of the show. Please, Dr. Paul.
And next Thursday, the 29th of February, 2024, is Rare Disease Day.
Yep.
And so across the country, there'll be multiple celebrations of Rare Disease Day. So I hope people get out, participate in those, and support the families and patients who have undiagnosed or rare diseases.
Excellent. Wonderful stories. I really, appreciate you sharing them here. We get the message out, hopefully to a wide audience of this extremely important set of initiatives that you're both championing. Again, for everybody that's going to be listening to this particular episode of our show across the various podcast networks or watching on our YouTube channel, you've been listening to Michele Herndon, Program Manager, Undiagnosed Diseases Network Foundation, Patient Navigation Program, also founder of Mitchell and Friends Foundation, as well as Dr. F. Sessions Cole, Board Secretary at the UDNF and Professor of Pediatrics, Washington University School of Medicine. Michele, Dr. Cole, I want to thank you both for taking time out of your schedules to come talk to us for a little while. Obviously, thank you for everything you do for the 30 million patients out there with undiagnosed diseases. And as we like to say on our show, thanks for helping to create a better tomorrow for all of them via what you're up to. Really a great story.
Thank you, Ira, very much.
Thank you for having us.
Great having you both.